Hello, my name is Malik Harrington. Welcome to another episode of the Family Budget Fisherman. Got a great show to share with you today. But before we get into the show, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment on this particular episode. And let me know if this is the kind of content that you had expected from this particular channel. Also, take an opportunity to share this video after you have watched it already to someone who you think may be interested in very similar content that you and I are finding very, very satisfying. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Today, what we're talking about in particularly is looking for the bite. Now, this is different than covering water, because in covering water, the goal is to be able to, as we say, cover water. You're looking to get into great distances in order to find a pattern, in order to find bodies, particular schools of fish, say bait fish and so forth. And mostly covering water is when you are fishing by boat rather than fishing on the bank. When you're looking for the bite, you're not necessarily trying to cover water. You're being a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical about where you're placing your bait, how you're placing your bait, so on and so forth. When you're just covering water, it's a lot more faster paced. This one is a little bit more, as we might say, finessey. There's some power finesse in it, but it's a little bit more finessey, if I can use that term. And the goal here, once again, is to take advantage of opportunities that you may see in the water for particular bites. This would be more like sight fishing. What people who sight fish do when they're in the boat, they're actually looking, they're not covering water per se, they're looking for opportunities to catch fish that they can actually see. We are working the water in very much the same way. And so this technique can be applied whether you're on the bank, fishing from the bank, or fishing from a boat. Because in both cases, you are not trying to be all over that body of water. You're looking for specific opportunities to fish. So when I am fishing in that way, I have a different set of baits that I have than I do when I'm just covering water. There are some overlaps in terms of types and styles. But for example, certain baits that I always have tied on, I always have a spinnerbait tied on. And for the record, I may not, if I'm covering water, I may not always have a spinnerbait tied on, but if I'm looking for the bite, I always have a spinnerbait tied on. I will sometimes have a backup, and if the bite is aggressive enough, I'll have another pole set up for chatterbait and the underspin, which basically are the underspin, the chatterbait, and the spinnerbait. That would all be related to one particular particular rod. Then I have my topwater baits. I will always have a frog, a dedicated frog, tied on. And then I will have, different, one or two different styles, either a walking style or a popping style of a topwater bait. And I'll have either one of them tied on. It just depends on what the water is looking like. And just remember, when you're looking for the bite, the water, you're paying more attention to the water than you are when you're covering water. For example, I can cover water if I'm just throwing a spinnerbait. I'm just going to throw that spinnerbait wherever I see water. Where I'm not going to do that if I'm looking for the bite, because I may be passing up bites that I don't want to pass up. I have different types of rods that I look for the bite with, and I'll show you those momentarily. So I'm going to be doing more of the tube style jigs, or I'll be throwing more of the curly tail swim bait curly tail style jigs. Here's another type of a swim bait here. It's on a long shank, 16th ounce white head. Or paddle tail, 2-inch. Or something that I've become very fond of, the twin tail, 16th ounce. And then I will always have a worm tied on. Now, this is one type of worm that I will have tied on. I tie curly tails, I tie straight tails, depending on what the water looks like. If it's a universal type of thing, it's springtime. When it's springtime, I'll do more curly tails, and then when the fish are a little bit more slower, I'll throw straight tails. I love straight tails, by the way. I will always have a crankbait tied up, and I prefer the square bills, narrow square bills, to have those tied on first, and then after, depending on how things work out, I'll move from there to a lipless crankbait, just depending on how I do. This I love because I can almost pitch and flip the lipless crankbaits. I love the sound that they even make. Also, my rod selections are a little bit differently. If I'm just covering water, remember, if I'm covering water, most of the time when I'm covering water, I'm generally speaking going to cover water with maybe 3 types of rods. So I will pull out, for example, if I'm covering, I'll pull out my Defy. I'll pull out a good medium-sized rod, or I will pull out, this is a 7.6. I have it set up as a crappie rod. I'll pull that out. And then I might pull out another, this is my 7-foot, I think this is 7.1 Omen. I may pull this out to throw some of the swim jigs that I have here. But I won't use as many when I'm just covering water, because the goal is to get a particular lure everywhere, as opposed to getting several types of lures in specific locations. So, but with this one, I do have a rod selection here. Now, I have 6 rods here. I have a 12-foot rod here, and I have a 7'6" rod. These are both for crappie fishing. And I have these are both set up with 2-pound tests, diameter line, but 15-pound break strength. And both of them are outfitted, well, one of them is outfitted with a 15-pound test fluorocarbon leader. The other one is, I think they both are. Yeah, they both are. I have a 7-footer over there that is not outfitted with a fluorocarbon leader, because there are times when I don't want to use a fluorocarbon leader. But suffice it to say, with these, this is 7.6, this is a 12-foot, and they have different uses. I may walk down a bank while I'm fishing and use that 12-footer to just put in these little 3-inch here, 3-inch lures like this one, or put in this 1.5 inch beauty right here. And what's interesting is I have the power to get them, either one of them, up and out, because while this 12-foot crappie rod has some limber, I bought this because it's a little bit more stiff than what crappie rods tend to be. So in case I get in a 2-pound bass or 3-pound bass or even a 4-pound bass, I can handle it. Most of the time I'll get those 2.5-pound crappie. Now I want you to imagine trying to get a 2.5-pound crappie over slop, because that's what you're going to be doing. You're dipping in slop, or you're dipping in places where typically with a shorter rod like the 7.6 rod, you kind of get hung up. This 12-foot rod, you're not going to get hung up. But if you have this thing outfitted with 4-pound tests, or 6 pound or 8 pound test, the chances of you getting that 2.5 pound fish up out of that heavy cover like that is going to be very slim. I want to limit my chances. There may be some consequence to having that heavy of a test, but 215, you're talking almost, this is silk size. Okay. Now, so I will always have a worm rod. This is my worm rod, one of my worm rods. Okay. And I like this worm rod, but I always have my worm rod sitting up there. And the main reason why is because when I'm throwing topwater, I always want to have a backup ready to go. Or if I find a spot where where tossing in a worm seems more appropriate than tossing in this 3-inch bait here, I want to be able to do that. I also have here 2 rods that are more universal, utilitarian style rods. And I don't necessarily have particular models. I have particular categories, as it were, because I have several models of rods. But these are both from from the 13 Fishing series. This is Omen, and this is Defy. They're both outfitted with the 645. 645 means a 6-pound test diameter, 45-pound test break strength. Okay, they're both outfitted there, so I can throw anything that I have listed here. But most of the time, I'm going to be throwing my tubes. I'm going to be tossing. If I'm going to be throwing for casting purposes, I may dip it with the 12-foot, this 3-inch lure, but I'm going to be casting and retrieving with one of these. The underspin, I'll throw more of the underspin there. Okay, and so I will. Most of my time will be with those kind of lures, and I'm only using those as representation because I have some crawdad. Excuse me. I have some crawdad representations as well that I would throw with those particular baits. As a matter of fact, well, it's in there, but I will throw some of the crawdad imitations as well with any one of those. Also, for pitching and flipping, I have this rod here. This is my trusty ugly stick. And yes, like I told you, I love ugly sticks, and I'm never getting away from ugly stick. I love my ugly stick. This is an inshore size. It's 7.6, but it's a little heavier than my medium over here. And I use this for pitching, for flipping, and specifically for throwing the floating frog. Now I have a frog rod over there, just dedicated frog rod. So when I'm on the boat, and I'm outfitted looking like I'm a tournament fisherman when I'm really not, I will actually have my specific frog rod. Matter of fact, I'm going to leave off camera 1 second and walk right over here and show it to you. A little bit shorter. This is 7 foot, a little more stout. I love this rod setup here. And this is strictly for throwing. Actually, I have 2 purposes here. I throw some of my bigger swim baits with this particular rod. I throw my frogs, and I throw my spoons with this particular rod here. But when I'm just looking for the bite, I'm not throwing that. I'm throwing this because, again, I'm looking for specific opportunities in the water. So I may have this, and I may throw, and I don't know why I don't have it out here. I may throw a little bit bigger. Matter of fact, I'm going to take the time to pull a tackle box out so I can just show it to you. I would be throwing some of my punching. Again, I would be throwing some sweet beaver, some bigger tubes there. I even have some of my bigger craws that I would throw in there. This is a Berkeley craw, which is really nice. So I would be throwing some of those baits in those specific spots. And once again, what is the goal here? The goal here is to look for the bite. There are two other things that I do that's specific to more value-oriented or budget-friendly style fishing. As you can see, I have 6 rods, and I'll save some time for talking about that momentarily. But let's see which one would be best. Okay, so here's my Omen, right? And this may sound like heresy to some of you, realistically, but it's not to me. So this is my rod setup. And what I tend to do is I tend to use on nearly all of my rigs, other than those dedicated for crappie purposes, I tend to use a swivel. You can see that swivel right there. Swivel. And a snap. Okay? I buy them separately, and I use them separately. Every now and then, you'll see, for example, on this rod here, I don't have a swivel. I'm just tied a double uni knot there, but I have a snap on there. And don't worry about my tag. And trust me, the fish are not as sophisticated about tags as we like to believe they are. So the reason why I do that, though, is to prevent line twists, which will compromise the quality of my line, compromise my casts, and it will increase my budget for fishing. And as we all know, braided line is not inexpensive. Even the inexpensive braid is expensive. So we have to do what we can to kind of keep and maintain our lines. So to that end, if I'm going to have line twists, I'd rather minimize the line twist by doing it this way. And also the snap. There is a lot of controversy in using a snap. Most people who make baits, say your crankbaits, your spinnerbait, and most often your topwater baits, you are often asked or often recommended to tie directly to the lure. And that's fine, especially if you are sponsored by someone or you have extreme discounted access to a lot of line. But for those of us who fish on a budget on a more regular basis, we have to kind of be a little bit more conscious about these kind of things. And just so that you know, I personally don't believe that you lose in terms of sensitivity. Yes, it's true. You may have some fish who mouth your bait and you not know it as well, but that is technique more than anything. Like I told you, I am a two-handed fisherman. So I don't fish, for example, I don't fish like this. A lot of people who depend on that rod being super sensitive, they fish like this. I fish like this. Okay? I fish like this. I don't pass myself the rod. Well, in this mode, I do pass myself the rod. But this is how I fish. When I'm really, truly finesse fishing, flipping, pitching, throwing stuff in the water, this is how I fish. And the way, when I set a hook, when I feel that line, I set the hook in 2 ways. Number one, I'm pulling up the pole to draw out the slack. And then that gives me time over here. For me, timing, giving my bait time to be bit and swallowed means a lot. So that's one of the reasons why I don't mind passing myself the rod when I'm in finesse situations. When I'm just casting and reeling, when I'm covering water, I'm not doing that. But when I'm looking for the bite, I do want to have that little extra second to kind of take my time. So having said that, I wanted to share that with you, what this was all about. When you're looking for the bite, always take into account what you can afford. Oh, I did remember to mention. So notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rods here. In this day and age, even if you are a beginning fisherman, take the time and invest in more than 1 or 2 rods. This is not that day anymore where you can just go out to the neighborhood creek. And believe me when I tell you this, there was a time when I was younger, when we had, regular streets, like paved roads, but we had these ditches, these drainage ditches that went up and down either side of the road, and they would only go down to maybe about 3 feet, full of fish. So I want you to imagine on an urban street, while you're going to work, going to school, going to the grocery store, and you have to pass over a ditch. Well, actually, the way that the roads were built, it was solid going in and out of the businesses, but there was a ditch on either side. And you could literally stop on the side of that road and fish. Well, those days don't exist anymore for most of us. Certainly for those of us who live here in Sacramento, California, that just does not exist anymore. So you have to kind of be more diverse in terms of your fishing selection. Can't just grab one rod, go hit the ditch and come back, which is what my point was. You definitely have to do something more. And that's why I emphasize, especially for entry-level fishermen, you don't have to think about spending a whole bunch of money. Some people will go and get regular combos and so forth. That's great. But suffice it to say that it is necessary for you to have several rods. And I can have these 6 rods, and these rods perform as if I'm carrying my full complement of between 9 and 11 rods. When I go heavy, I have 9 to 11 rods, depending on weather, depending on what size boat or how many people I am in the boat with. If I'm in the boat with one other person, I usually go with the full 11. If I know I'm going with at least one other person in a boat, if I'm in a big pontoon boat, I'll go with a 9. If I'm in a boat with just one other person, with 2 other people, smaller boat with 2 other people, I'll go with 9. But I'm heavy. I go heavy. When I'm just looking for the bite, especially when I'm on the bank, I just carry the 6 rods. They're easy to carry. I get my selection of baits and I go look for that bite. And then if my first selection doesn't work, then I'll go for the next one. I was asked, do I have like my first string? Well, I have my rod and reel arsenal. My rod and reel arsenal, if you take a look at that video, my rod and reel arsenal is my first string. So there you have it. So once again, if you're looking for the bite, take the time, pick out a few baits. I would say pick out 10 to 15 baits. And if you like me, use a snap, use some swivels so that you can save, because like I said, braided line is expensive. This is my spool that I use now because I use one type of line for so many. This is that Fins 40G, 45-pound test braided, rated. Take the time to kind of look at that. I don't know how clear that's coming in, but I'm gonna give you the best shot that I can. I'm gonna go up a little bit more right there. Now, these spools, they're not inexpensive at all. This is a 1,500 yard spool. So I'll let you go to Fins and see how much that costs. You don't want to have to, and by the way, I'm gonna explain to you something. I did not pay what they have on that website there. I paid less than 50% of the cost because I got it at one of the shows. So, and they had a special. This wasn't a special to me. It was a special that they had at the show. one of the fishing shows that comes here every year in Sacramento. So once again, I wanted to share that with you and to see, for you to see exactly how I fish when I'm going for the bite, as opposed to just covering water. And I hope you like the show. I hope to say please take the time to like, subscribe, share, comment on this video. Let me hear from you. Let me know what's going on with you. And let me say this to you once again: never, ever, 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 ever get out there and try to break your family budget. Always get out there though and try to break your personal